Welcome to Energy Solutions, where we explore the stories and trends shaping America's changing energy landscape. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler. As the new Congress gets moving on its energy policy priorities, we have a special bonus episode featuring our conversation with one of the top energy leaders tasked with managing the growth of AI, the reshoring of manufacturing, and electrification as the power grid grapples with shrinking supply. Congressman Bob Latta, who represents the 5th District in Ohio, is the chair of the U.S. House Subcommittee on Energy. Earlier this month, the subcommittee held a hearing addressing what is needed to meet historic increases in energy demand. Chairman Latta voiced his concern that in 2025 alone, the Energy Information Administration projects that 12.3 gigawatts of coal capacity is set to retire. And by the end of the decade, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation projects as high as 52 gigawatts of thermal generation will retire. PJM Interconnection Senior Vice President Awesome Hawk testified as a witness. He emphasized that PJM is nearing the end of the interconnection queue reform effort it undertook to help bring new resources online more quickly. He highlighted that while 50,000 megawatts have cleared the queue but are not yet interconnected, PJM expects future turnaround times to drop to 1 to 2 years. Hawk also stressed the importance of strong price signals to attract investment, reinforcing PJM's view that its capacity market remains a critical tool for driving new resource development. Meanwhile, legislators in Ohio, Congressman Latta's home state, are working to pass energy legislation that will help attract investment from data centers and other large energy users while ensuring that reliability is maintained and consumers aren't burdened with the risks of much-needed new power supply. We spoke with Congressman Latta on February 20th. Listen in for our conversation on his priorities and concerns about meeting the nation's growing need for electric power and why he's optimistic that bipartisan support for energy expansion and grid modernization will lead to meaningful progress. Well, thank you, Congressman, for taking a few minutes to be with us this morning. We know a few weeks ago you ascended to the chairman's seat on the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Energy Subcommittee, a very important subcommittee for what we do and also for the country. And that subcommittee's first hearing of the year, you highlighted a question that you consistently asked witnesses over the last several years in the committee, which is, do we need more or less energy? And on every occasion, every witness has always said we need more. And you're taking the gavel at a pretty important time in the energy industry. We see projections for future demand growing in Ohio, but also around the country in ways that we haven't seen in a generation. And Ohio, in many ways, is the bullseye of interest for building new gen because of manufacturing and for the new data centers and all the things that are coming along with artificial intelligence that we see around the energy space. And I know the subcommittee has already hit the ground running on these issues to try and explore and understand the challenges that are ahead. As you look at that, what are your top priorities as the chair of the Energy Subcommittee?
Well, again, thank you. And you're absolutely correct. When you look back over the last several years, just asking that simple question, do we need more or less energy? We absolutely have to have more energy, and it's going to be base load.
Yeah.
I look at my district in Northern Ohio. I have 86,000 manufacturing jobs. I always say this, I just don't need energy. I need affordable energy.
Yeah.
And also, I represent the largest farm income producing district in the state of Ohio, which is also, you need to have all kinds of energy being produced. So, when you're looking at that crystal ball, I go back to 2014. 2014, we had a polar vortex. It's worse. We've had really cold weather here the last week and a half, but nothing like 2014. But I asked PJM over those years the same question. If we had the same situation, could we sustain it and not have one blackout or brownout across our state? And they told me every year we had no problem until last year. And they said, well, maybe into 26. Well, we might be already there today because you brought it up. When you think about the data centers coming online and just north of 5 miles from where I'm sitting right now, they're putting a data center. And another city in my district, they're putting up a data center. So when you just think about what we're considering right now, the 4.5 to 6 to 8% more power that we're going to have just this year alone, PJM is saying, if you go to their website and look, we're taking off generation at the same time the need is going up exponentially. The electricity usage is massive. Yeah, I know there. I'm a big clipper, and so when I saw in the Wall Street Journal
Yeah.
earlier in the year, there was a graph on just over the last about 10 to 15 years what the projection was and how it's just skyrocketing today.
Yeah.
So we're going to have that power, and so it's going to be base load. And so when I think about what we're going to have to do, we're going to have to, one is on the nuclear side. I think our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have really started to think that, yeah, we're going to have to go nuclear.
Hmm.
And again, if you want carbon free, it is nuclear. And what are we looking at there? Well, small modulars are really starting to look, very attractive from around the country. Then we're going to have the uranium, like my legislation in the last Congress. And I'm a big proponent that we're going to have to really look at recycling our spent nuclear rods. The French have been doing it. We should be,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in 1977, the Carter administration, they killed it. And so here we are today, all these, almost 50 years later, saying we better do something. So then I think about our electric grid. Our grid needs to be modernized. I've worked on that. But if you think about the amount of power that's going to have to go through it,
Hmm.
and then you look at the distribution side, about 2 years ago, EPA was about we're going to make it impossible in this country to make a transformer. So the permitting, it kind of goes on and on and on. But
Yeah.
we're going to be very, very active in the subcommittee because again, permitting and also working with our friends over the Natural Resources Committee is going to be absolutely essential because again, we're going to have to get it to point A to point B as soon as possible.
You've already run down a fairly lengthy list, all of which we would agree with, of priority items. But what do you see as the most significant role for Congress to play in the energy space? Because the energy industry, as you note, is challenged to invest in really dozens of gigawatts or thousands of megawatts is how people typically think about it in new capacity. And how does Congress support an energy industry that's looking for ways to invest in new energy assets, as you just noted, of several different types?
Well, one of the great things, and I've been on the committee about 15 years, and when you sit up on the dais, and no matter, we have the broadest jurisdiction of any committee, but
Right.
I've always said this, when you sit up there, we're talking about the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the companies out there are going to be moving. We don't want to put laws on the books that then turn into regulations. They're going
Hmm.
to push them back because most of all, I shouldn't say most, all these companies are so much farther ahead than we are because they're already planning where they need to be.
Right.
And so what Congress's role has got to be is to work with everyone out there to say, okay, we know what we're in a real pinch. And so how are we going to help you get this done and
Hmm.
for the American people? And so that's the first thing that we in Congress have got to consider.
So, what's your outlook, as you noted, and I think a couple of minutes ago, about the importance of cost effectiveness or affordability as well as reliability? How do you look at the energy trilemma of affordability, reliability, and sustainability? How do you think we should be thinking about balancing the need for reliable power with affordability to try and advance the the artificial intelligence economy or the advanced manufacturing economy that we see coming?
Well, those are all very important because again, as I said earlier, and you just mentioned, you can have energy out there, but if it's not affordable, it's not worth anything to
That's
you because
exactly right.
you can't use it. So we have to really make sure that, when you're thinking about on the permitting side, these things all work together. On the permitting side, you can't have something take 7, 8, 9, 10 years to get something done. And again, we always wanted to make sure we're doing it in a safe manner and
Mhm.
doing it right. But again, you don't want to have something just bogged down in the process. Because again, the cost of money down the road
Yeah.
is even going to increase even more because the federal government right now is going to be paying $1 trillion a year just to pay interest on the debt.
Yeah.
Now, besides looking at what the price of West Texas Intermediate is every morning before I leave the house, I also check to see what the 10-year Treasury is
Right.
because that's what we're borrowing at.
Yeah.
And so it's important to me that we think about these things is how do we advance things, get it built because again, uh, I'm very fortunate. This is a work week. I'm now across my district again. But I always like to talk to people when I'm going through faculties and businesses and any place
Hmm.
else. What about supply chain issues they're having?
Right.
And so on the supply chain side, you run into is that it could, if all of a sudden it's not there, you have to try to figure out how do I build my cost in, and all of a sudden the cost is even greater down the road. Affects the affordability in. And if we don't have the uranium that we need to have for our reactors and the new generation that we're going to be seeing, especially from the SMRs,
Right.
that it's going to be different. But we've got to have all of these things in play. And again, that's why I really see Congress's role is to help shape that law
Yeah.
that then become the regulations that they can go out and get this done. Because we can talk about some of these things forever, but if we don't get it done,
Right.
it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And we get it's what the communist Chinese are doing, especially they're looking at with the reactors they're putting online. You look at they're building well over 100 plus new coal-fired plants with something we're not doing. And I think about our refining capacity in this country. We haven't built any refineries since 1977. Everything. I mean, we have to have a complete picture we have to do on the energy front.
You really cast a wide net there. So, any ideas about previews of upcoming hearings that we should be keeping an ear to the ground for? Any news you'd like to break for us?
Well, I think, our first was really important because it
Yeah,
kind of set the groundwork we have to go. I know that the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Guthrie, is looking at, thinking about on the AI on the data center side.
sure.
Because again, if the United States is going to lead, that's going to be an important part. And I truly believe that. But again, we can't lead if we don't have the power. And depending where they're putting their data centers in right now,
Hmm.
a lot of them want to be closer to water because for cooling purposes, that's going to be important. But if you think about parts of the country that don't have it, then it's going to be totally on electricity to get this thing done.
Yeah,
But again, it's the how are we going to do it? Because some of the companies are talking about, well, maybe because of all the question about grid reliability and modernization of that grid, do they have to think about being inside the meter then with their power source? So I think all of these things are going to be examined coming up. But again, I'm really looking at also on the nuclear side that we'll be
sure.
talking about and hearing, the recycling side, but the permitting side, as I mentioned earlier, but also, utilizing what we have out there. That the United States has become the largest producer of natural gas, the cleanest of any place in the world,
Yeah.
and helping our allies. When the Russians cut the Austrians off just before Christmas, you know, when I've spoken with Central and Eastern European leaders, they've all said the same thing. We want to buy
Hmm.
LNG from the United States, because they see us as dependable, and they look at the Russians as we're giving them money to fund a war.
Yeah. Well, if you'll allow me, you've mentioned permitting and siting, and I couldn't agree with you more on the importance that it has because our members are some of the nation's largest investors in power generation, both dispatchable and renewable energy, as well as energy storage. And we're going to need all of those things to meet the country's energy reliability needs, to meet the sustainability goals that people have, as well as needing and understanding that the country is going to have to invest in significant quantities of all kinds of new generation assets. But as you just described, permitting and siting is incredibly frustrating and difficult right now. And it really takes far too long to get from start to finish, especially as you noted in that conversation you had with PJM. The timeline is getting shorter and shorter for the need for new assets. And we're grateful for your support, of course, for the federal permitting process improvements, and we appreciate the attention that the committee pays on these issues. And I know that House Natural Resources also has a sizable role in the permitting reform issue, but I'm interested in your perspectives on the opportunities for meaningful progress in 2025. If you think that you're optimistic, or if there are some sticking points that might be useful for us to try to help on, or if others need to be aware of, we're really just interested in your thoughts on if we can get from here to effective permitting and siting reform in this Congress.
Well, two things if I could. Back in 2008, it was when Republicans, we came up with the idea of an all of the above energy policy. So you
Right.
think about all of our existing, what's out there today, our renewables that are out there, but the federal government not picking the winners and losers.
Yeah.
And I was at a very large transmission company this past year, and when I was at their site, their operations center, they're getting a history right now on renewables coming in because, again, what they're saying is we've got to get as much power into that
Mhm.
grid as fast as we possibly can, and knowing where it's going to come from and how it's going to get there. So, every type of energy out there is going to play a part in this because
Sure.
it's absolutely essential. But I'm very optimistic when it comes to what I'm looking at in 2025. I believe that not only that Congress understands it, but the American people are going to demand that we're out there getting this done.
Hmm.
And so I think that if we haven't, and if you go back in the last several Congresses, I think that there's more consensus now on that. Yes, we have to have that energy because again, without the energy, we fall behind. And if we want to fall behind the rest of the world, especially when you think about in the data centers, and it's doesn't happen until we get all these other issues solved on our energy production and the transmission, the distribution.
Yeah.
So I am, sometimes you can be all doom and gloom in Washington. I know some people
Yeah.
tell me when I get done speaking, well, that wasn't very enlightening and helpful, but you always want to be truthful. But I think in this case that we do have great opportunity that we can get done in this Congress. So I'm really looking forward to it and very, very excited.
We are always happy to have notes of optimism when it comes to improvements to the permitting and siting process. So we'll definitely take that as just a couple questions, and then I'll let you get on to the rest of your very busy day. We know that item one or 1A for the Republican leadership in the first half of 2025 is budget reconciliation. And our members are staunch advocates for competitive wholesale power markets, like the markets administered by PJM that you've mentioned a couple of times. And those markets place the risk of investment on asset developers like us and not on captive ratepayers. Since the passage of the IRA in 2022, EPSA members have really included status quo energy policies created by the IRA in their investment decisions, such as credits around carbon capture and sequestration. And while we appreciate that the process is still underway and far from complete, do you have a view about the usefulness of the IRA credits or what you're hearing from energy related or energy interested colleagues about how some of the incentives may be treated in reconciliation, or are we still too early in the process to have a good handle on that?
Well, I think I like to start with our Speaker of the House. Speaker Johnson has said that he doesn't want to use a sledgehammer when we're talking about that. We want to use a
Right.
scalpel. So if something's out there that's been helpful, let's make sure. But the other things, if it's something that's not been helpful, then that
It's got to go.
then you can use that sledgehammer.
Sure.
But on the other areas, he said he wants to really utilize a scalpel. So I believe the speaker will continue on with that. So I think that as when people plan, they just should hear what the speaker is saying on that.
I think that's helpful and instructive. So we'll take that. One last question. I was scanning my news this morning and I caught a press report that indicates that as you've mentioned before, there's going to be a hearing around artificial intelligence and some of those things. Are there any things that we should be looking for as part of that, or are there specific issues that you're trying to tease out as far as gather more information and how Congress can respond to the challenges that exist?
Well, we started. I know we had some discussions, and also in a hearing, it came up in the last Congress when we were talking about AI, and how are you going to handle it? And
Yeah.
give me a quick example. I've been working on autonomous vehicle legislation. I'd gotten it out of the House, the legislation, several Congresses ago. Unfortunately, it didn't get through the Senate. But one of the questions I always ask people is this very simple question. When you're talking about autonomous vehicles, I asked them, are you where you thought you'd be 5 years ago? And they said, no, we're so much farther ahead. We were in a meeting on AI one day, and I brought that example up. And
Yeah.
I remember the person saying, well, I don't want to correct you too much, but he said, we don't look at it that way. Every month it should be changing 6 to 10 to 12 times faster.
Wow.
So it's the exponential of this. So what we're looking at, especially when you think about AI, is that you don't want to stop it, but what are the proper guardrails we're going to have out there on it? And how does that tie into, of course, what we have to be thinking about, all the data centers going online, and how do we get the energy to them so we can lead the world, because we want to lead the world in technology.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more on that. Congressman, you've been very generous with your time this morning. We certainly appreciate it and really appreciate your time with us today. We certainly look forward to working with you on addressing many of the issues before your committee, your subcommittee, but also the committee as a whole. We thank you very much for your time today.
I greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.
You do the same. That's a wrap for this episode of Energy Solutions. A big thank you to Congressman Bob Latta for sharing his time and insights on the challenges and opportunities in America's evolving energy sector. EPSA will be holding its fourth Competitive Power Summit in Washington, D.C. on April 2nd, where we'll hear from more energy policy experts and state and federal energy regulators on how the issues discussed in this podcast can be successfully navigated. We'll also hear how they hope to achieve these policy priorities, including permitting reform, power market planning and procurement, the balance between state and federal jurisdiction, supply chain challenges, and more. Visit our website to register. Seats are filling up fast. As always, we appreciate you tuning in. If you found this conversation valuable, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow EPSA on X at EPSA News, on LinkedIn, and on Blue Sky for more updates on policies, trends, and solutions driving competitive power markets and a reliable energy future. Our music was written, produced, and performed by Let Me Hold That Ltd. Until next time, I'm Todd Snitchler, and this has been the EPSA Energy Solutions Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 175,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.